So welcome to this month's event where we're tackling the age-old subject of employee engagement and the new term that's risen from the depths after the Great Resignation of quiet quitting. And to help me do that today, I've got three experts on the panel. So we've got in my screen, top left is Keith Stapleton. So give us a wave, Keith. We've got to my right, maybe not to yours, is Chappell from Centrical. Give us a wave, Ian. And then we've got Jimmy Hosang from the newly branded Mojo CX, powered by TMAC. So welcome to all three of you. And we'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves in a little bit more detail in a moment. But just want to say thank you to everybody that's joined today. I appreciate there's been a lot of activities and events going on this week in the contact center industry. So if you've been to the contact center call and contact center expo for the last 2 days, and now you're doing this as well, thank you very much, because I know that's a lot of time out of people's busy lives. It's good to be able to run these events and share them. Maybe a little bit of forethought and planning on my part for next time, not to do it on the same week as the expo. But I'm just going to let my guests introduce themselves as we go through, and then we've got some questions that we've planned. But as ever with these events, we can put the clipboard down and go rogue. So if it goes into a particular direction, we may have some questions that we've not necessarily prepped for. But what I also want to do as part of this is anybody who has any questions, any challenges, any issues in their businesses with either attrition, engagement, culture, any of those types of queries that might be driving some of the issues that you're seeing as part of that quiet quitting phraseology and that whole piece around employee engagement. If there's anything that you have that's a burning platform for you that you need some help or advice in, drop it into the chat, and we'll make sure that we build that into the flow of today's session so that we can give anybody who needs it some advice and some help. But I'm going to pass over to my distinguished panel and get yourselves to introduce yourselves, and then we'll move headlong into the meat of today's session. So I'm going to start in my right-hand corner with Jimmy Hosang. Over to you, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Jimmy. I'm the CEO of Mojo CX, formerly known as the Modular Analytics Company. And we've been trading for about 4 years. We started off as an outcome-based consultancy specializing in next best action, speech analytics, and conversational guidance and targeted coaching. And over time, we've productized and we launched our kind of new suite of products over at the Contact Center Expo. And really interesting to have this panel discussion because since inception, we've always been home-based. And we operate in the UK mainly, but also we've got some guys in North America, and we've got a development hub in Istanbul as well, in Turkey. And so we've got kind of a lot of interesting internal demands around resourcing, because obviously software engineers and data engineers and AI people in general are very difficult to come by. But then we're also trying to fix those problems and support our contact center kind of clients on those journeys as well. So really looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome, and pleasure to have you. Ian, I'll pass over to yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for giving up your time. Ian Chappell, I'm a senior solution consultant based up in Northumberland, just north of Newcastle. Been in and around contact centers for 23 years this year. Started off as an agent, probably quite a disgruntled agent, if I remember back to my younger self. But I've worked in many roles in the contact center, and I did probably the last 15 years in planning, so WFM. So we were the guys who said no to everything and really, got under the skin of the agents because we didn't let them take holidays and stuff, and wrote them in on Christmas Day and all that kind of thing. But a few years back, I joined Nice Systems as a WFM consultant and really got into the engagement side of, the decisions that we make using technology within contact centers. And then I joined Centrical last year, and we are purely an employee experience platform. So I'm going to talk a little bit around how, and apologies, Gary, how I really hate the term employee engagement, because I think it's been done to death. And I think we need to sort of almost peel back the onion and revisit, what it is that builds that, because I've come up with this waffly term EX2, which I'll talk a little bit around, much to the humour of my team. But I think, you know, there's so much we can do around employee engagement, you know, based on other things. So lovely to meet you all, and I'm really looking forward to the session.
And fantastic to have you, Ian. Thank you very much. And I'll try not to use the word employee engagement just so I don't irritate you too much. And then finally, Keith from Select Planning. Hand over to yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, thanks for joining us. I'm Keith. I probably know some of you, many of you I don't. Select Planning is in its 10th year, believe it or not. For us, that's flown by. Huge raft of experiences across those 10 years, which has really stood me in good stead, and my colleague Adrian, as to the wider world of contact centres in lots of different areas, but also non-contact centre resource planning. Resource planning is my meat and veg, but I do venture into other things as well, as I'm sure most of us have experienced, the things that sit beside resource planning. Employee engagement, sorry I said it, is something that I'm very focused on. The best laid plans don't mean much if you can't actually engage people and you can't make it come to life. And that's what hat I've got on today.
Brilliant. And lovely to have you too, Keith. So let's head into the meat of today's discussion. And I want to just tackle this this phrase that we're hearing. And I think it's probably one that I've only really started hearing maybe over the last few months. And I think from my perspective, it's the angle that I take is, does it exist or not? So I'm going to go to the panel and ask this question, and I'm going to start off with yourself, Jimmy. But do you believe quiet quitting really exists? What's your thoughts?
Well, like, I think we've seen like a load of buzzwords and stuff come up and like newly formed things, but like, to me, quiet quitting is like just not really giving a shit about your work. And I think if you reframe it as that, I think that's been going on for a long time now. I just think that obviously, you know, post-COVID, all that kind of jazz, I think when you've been in the office and you, in many cases, you have a Hawthorne effect where, you know, you're in the office, your colleagues are in the office, oftentimes your boss is in the office, like there's a raised level of kind of, what's the word, of motivation not to look as though you're slacking off. But I think with the pandemic and people's attitudes towards work and things in general changing, and mainly towards work-life balance, I do think like the motivation to work harder and faster than you did before has probably changed. So I think quiet quitting's kind of a nice way of putting it. But I think in a lot of ways, like just the ramp down and the reprioritization of people's lives to get more work-life balance, I think has been going on for a while.
Hold on to that thought about Hawthorne effect, because I really like that principle. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. Ian, from your perspective, building on what Jimmy said there, do you believe that quiet quitting has been around, and has it been, like Danny Wareham said, just another rephrase of the word coasting? What's your view?
Yeah, we used to call them plodders, Danny. It's an awful term, but yeah, we used to call them plodders. But you know, I think I think it's always been there. You know, I like to sort of call it the life cycle of the disengaged. Everything's rosy in the garden when you first start, then the job kicks in, and then you know some of your KPIs start taking a hit, your adherence, your CSAT. Then you start turning up late, coming back late from breaks, taking longer on breaks, avoiding calls until eventually you leave. So I guess it's always been there, and there's this sort of unintended damage that this creates. So you know, you're still in the office, you're still providing your 8 hours a day or whatever it is you're contracted to do, but it's all the unintended damage that goes with that. So it's just probably been rebadged by some clever marketing person who probably works for another software vendor somewhere, and then all of a sudden,
McKinsey.
Oh, McKinsey, yeah, and all of a sudden it's a new thing, but it's always been there. So it's nothing new from me.
Sorry, can I just? There is one thing. Sorry, because I was just noticing that
I knew you were like this, Jimmy. I have to control you, but go on.
Sorry, no. It was what's really interesting is I was listening to Ian talking then, and we're just talking about engagement and things. It's not to pick on people, but there's loads of people who've come onto a call and they've not turned the cameras on either. And is that like something like now in our business? It's like there's certain people who always have our cameras on, and then there's other people who don't have the cameras on. And it like I don't know what your view on that is, Ian, but like is that a sign of like engagement or not? I've seen more people turning the cameras off.
Yeah. Paul Banks, cameras off. There you go. You've just dished out the audience off. Thank you very much. I think it's a fair point though. What's your comment on that, Ian?
I think each one on their merits, you know, as you mentioned, people have had a very busy week. They've been to, you know, the expos, they've been to, you know, God knows where, off-site. They've got, you said, kids running about, dogs barking, window cleaner knocking on to be paid, all those things. So the fact that people have joined, I think you've got to, you know, judge each of those things on their merits. But again, you know, as we go through, like, I guess that's where we could touch upon employee engagement being the core of this whole session. I think there's two things that come before that. I think it's employee experience, but even before then, employee expectations. And this is where I start talking about EX2. These two things combined will eventually get you to the point where you do, you know, where you do have that employee engagement improving. So, you know, personalization is a big thing that us here at Centrical believe in. So, you know, each person with their camera off might have a very valid reason, but might be paying attention all the same.
And just to bring in your perspective there, Keith, because you I suppose you draw on this from an operational angle. What does quiet quitting mean to you from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, it isn't new. It's a new terminology for something we've seen before, and I agree with the aspects that Ian and Jimmy have brought up there. I could give a list of names. Work to rule is another one. I think that the challenge here is to actually say to ourselves what's caused it. Now, yes, we've come through COVID, but actually anybody who's worked in a sales environment will be all too aware. Hit your sales target and what happens next year? It gets increased. And I think systematically what we've done is we've expected more and more from our staff. And I'm not just talking about volume, I'm talking about complexity, skills and things like this. And we probably haven't kept pace with their terms and conditions. So I'm talking salary, where they work, you know, the times that they work and things like that. And I think some of it is we've been living on goodwill, and you should never run any business on goodwill because it's only going to last so long. And I spend a lot of time in the NHS, and they use a lot of incentives to get their staff to do extra things. And those incentives stop becoming incentives when you're using them 11 months of the year, and the other month you're doing something different to get more out of people. So I think at the end of the day, we have to be very careful that we understand what is, if you like, the baseline of the job. What have we employed you to do? And if you're doing anything extra to that, are we recognizing and rewarding that? Or have we just started taking it for granted? And switch your human head on, take your business head off, and just say to yourself, look at your friendships. You'll do almost anything for your friends, but you won't keep doing it forever if you don't get something back. Yeah. And I think that's the human side of quiet quitting, whatever name you say. Yes, we have plodders. We have people who are happy to get to that level and not excel. We have people who want to excel because they want to be promoted and they want to move on. Ultimately, though, that's down to them. What we're talking about here is what expectation we set of people, and is our baseline always moving upwards, but the rewards do not.
And I think that's a really interesting point. And I can already see that there is there's lots of comments going into the chat, lots of conflicting sides and views, which is good to see. Everybody can't agree, but I think there's some really interesting stuff. So if you do have thoughts on this, I would encourage you to drop it into the chat, because I will come and call on you when we move to the Q&A section, because I think there's some really interesting stuff going in there already. Keith, I want to stick with you for a second, because you talked about the change in expectations there, and the change in realities of the contact center. And I suppose we've got a new way of working, or a new way of working has been forced on us, and a new way of working has been forced on how leaders engage their teams. So how do you think as a leadership team we've adapted to that new way of working and that new environment, and maybe what do we need to do differently to help improve the landscape as it is?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because you used the word enforced, didn't you? COVID pandemic enforced a lot of people to start implementing remote working on a large scale. Previously up to there, it was probably somewhere between 5 and 10% of your resource. And what it really was filling in the little peaks and troughs at the top, because you could ask people and they were readily able and equipped and willing to come off the phone, go back on the phone, do split shifts if you want, for the simplest of terms. But what we've actually done is we've ended up with people working remotely. And remotely, I don't just mean location. They're no remote people to us. Do we actually really know them? And that's a task that you've covered before with the managers, isn't it? How do I manage somebody when I can't have visual sight of them and when I don't get to know the person themselves? Because let's face it, we've probably all got to where we've got as much through our personality as our skills and our ability, because that's what makes you stand out. So I think we're still at that precipice where we haven't really taken in grand scale, and I haven't seen an awful lot coming back to say, hang on, yeah, this is where you need to be migrating your workforce to. And there are some other worrying things I'll come on to that contradict quiet quitting, such as productivity increase. I can do more when I'm at home. Yeah. And then you also got quiet quitting coming in, which is the opposite. So let's be that we may come back to that one a little bit later. But yeah, I don't think we really have. And I think the manager role, not the senior leadership team, not the agent level, that piece in the middle is really, really difficult. And some people, you're stripping their asset away from them as to why they were a manager in the first place.
And I think you've touched on a really good point there, and it's one that I think one of the speakers at the expo talked about, and it's that hybrid way of working. And you've got people that are remote, you've got people that are in the office, and then you've got people that are in that hybrid environment where we may have been able to adapt to a fully remote way because we had 18 months of doing it because COVID forced that on us. Then we started moving into a hybrid role, and now some people, and if you look at some of the big tech firms, are insisting people come back to the office now. But you've got that environment now where you've got that potential for bias for people in the office to be favoured over people who are a bit further and a bit more distant. And you know that
I wouldn't use the word favoured. I'd be very careful there, and I'm not being pedantic here. I would say better understood or more understood rather than favoured, because actually I think when you favour somebody, it's because you have an intrinsic better knowledge of them over somebody else and their skill levels are. So it's the bit that's missing is probably the differentiator in the favour bit, Gary. I think you just have a better understanding of them. And I think that's quite key. How do you get to know your people? Let's be frank. If you're fully hybrid, if you're fully working remote, as an employer, you may look at it and say, I've still got the management responsibilities, cost and infrastructure, training, etc., my management team, which is a hard job to do. I'm only that away from outsourcing them.
Yeah, but is it engagement as well though? Is it something to do with having people who go travel to a site, like it's a level of engagement with yourself as a company versus somebody who might actually, and look, I can argue both sides. Like I was a contractor, I was a consultant like for years, and I've always worked at home, but that suited me because I was very much like a transient kind of worker who had worked from place to place to place, and I wasn't particularly kind of engaged with a particular brand. So, but do you not need two types of people? Like
you do, yeah. Jimmy, and I've been working for 10 years as you've just described. I think the difference with that style of working though is it is never permanent. It's always a temporary situation, and therefore you're not looking to, if you like, for the want of a better term, climb your corporate ladder, get promoted, be recognized, other than for that contract. But you are right, there can be two ways. I'm not sure we've seen great examples yet of how you do the remote management, and I don't want to divert this off onto another subject. If people have got ideas, have got some stuff, then it may be worth revisiting at some time.
I want to bring Ian in on this point as well, though, because I think you've both touched on some really good things. Is it COVID forced us to go one particular way, and that was remote. And what we would normally do if we were recruiting for remote staff, we'd go out and recruit for people who have a desire and a want and a personal circumstance that lends itself to remote working. Same we would do with hybrid, but actually now we're in a an odd environment in that there were people that didn't necessarily think they wanted to work remotely that now love it and want it, but we want them back in the office and we want them to do hybrid. So I think that onboarding process now is a really interesting one. I want to bring Ian in from an onboarding perspective. It's like, how do we tackle that now that we've got that problem? How do we tackle it? Because that's what is driving part of the disengagement.
Yeah, absolutely. And a thing that, that I'm hearing a lot now when I work, so I work with a lot of global BPO customers working for Centrical. And one thing that we're hearing is that they're seeing a huge increase in that first 90-day attrition. So obviously the attrition is the silver bullet that we all want to fix in our contact centers, right? We fix that. We fix so many other metrics and, fix so many other costs of the business. But this first 90 days, and it's coming through what we've termed internally as job shock. And it comes back to that expectation setting. So, when you are, onboarding anyone, do they know from day one what's expected of them? Yes, they're expected to work 40 hours a week. They're going to be taking multiple channels, but do they know that they might not be able to work flexible hours? Do they know that they have to be in an office 2 or 3 times a week? And that could be dictated to by the business, depending on demand. These are the things that I think get to the point where someone, not only is the role tough, but, the things that they might have took for granted if they've come from a different industry or a different contact center is about setting that expectation. Have people got a pre-boarding strategy? So customers come to us now to say, okay, Centrical, we want to use Centrical now to build a pre-boarding strategy. We know that it's an employer's market, an employee's market, sorry, in terms of you might go for 5 different roles, then get to the day when you can pick the one you want to take. How do we get people on the hook so that they're going to turn up on that Monday? Again, try making it fun and engaging. Don't send a 19-year-old who's probably just out of university or might be their first contact center. Don't send them a big envelope of contracts and things about they're going to learn on day one. Try and make it a bit more modern and engaging. See if there's an appetite for buddying. So this is something that one of our customers have started on board, and it's almost having like a buddy from day one. So someone on their front line who has shown an intention to progress and develop managerial skills, or want to become a coach, is almost buddy them up with a new starter. And what they've started to do is they've started to build that buddy time into their shrinkage budget, because they say, okay, for maybe an extra 0.5%, 1% in their budget, they're seeing great strides in terms of keeping those people early and setting those expectations. So that's something as well. And don't overwhelm the new hires. Try not to overwhelm them. I know that we want to get them up to proficiency and taking calls as soon as possible. But let's have a look to see if the onboarding is the right time.
I think you've touched on a really good point there. I mean, the 3 things that have stood out from what you've just said there for me, and it's job shock, pre-boarding strategy, and the right allocation of shrinkage. And I think that's where we've got, as an operational team and as a leadership team, that's where your strategy needs to be very employee centered, is to say, right, actually, if I'm going to provide the best experience for an employee, I need to factor that into my operational rhythm. I need to factor that into my shrinkage. I need to factor that into my mentoring, speed to competency, and making sure that we've got the structure right for them. Because what happens, and we've all seen it, is all coaching, all buddying, all mentoring stops when the abandonment rate hits a ringing red alarm, or when the service level is against the wall. So I'm going to come to Keith about that in a second, but while we're on this train of thought, and whilst we're on this whole demographic and onboarding piece, I want to bring Jimmy in, because we talked about in the prep session here, Jimmy, about people's expectations of work these days, and how they go about making money, and what the easiest option is. And we talked about side hustle and side hustle culture. Is side hustle culture, given the demographic and the changing demographic of where contact center people are coming from, is that side hustle culture of making money while asleep killing off engagement and productivity in the contact center? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's something that people need to be really, really mindful of. So I'll do like a quick straw poll. Has anyone here read the 4-Hour Work Week? I've got one. Chris. Okay. So the
all
4-hour
boxes have got hands up.
There's some, yeah, everybody. Yeah. So the 4-hour work week, I think it might be 10 years old now. It might be even a little bit longer. It's written by a guy called Tim Ferriss, and effectively it tells you like how you can 10x your output. And there's lots of really good advice. There's lots of good stuff about visioning and structuring things and how you make passive income. But it's not the passive income that's the most important thing. The most important thing, rule number one of the 10-hour work week, is work from home. Because if you're in the office where your internet's constantly being monitored and where you've got people looking over your shoulder all of the time, you don't have the space or time or any kind of ability to take on a side hustle.
Yeah.
So the rule number one is work from home. And I believe, like, I've seen this kind of coming in frequently. I kind of encourage it with a lot of my guys, with my devs and other people. I know like Paul's on here, but Paul does a bit of introducing and he's got some content management and stuff like that on the side. But so I encourage it with my guys. But rule number one, if you want to do it, is work from home. And I think that people's expectations about what they want, the quiet quitting to me is almost a bit of like a working in the office and just trying to get through a day. Whereas actually, the pandemic has meant that everybody's now working from home. And I think I saw some stats around like the amount of small businesses that are open, that have been opening over the past 2 years, has been absolutely going through the roof. And that's because like rather than like fill up the day with like calls for work, people are taking 2, 3, 4 hours here and there to like, you know, do a little bit of a side hustle. And why would you fill up your 40 hours of work a week when you could actually, you know, do the bare minimum and do something that you really, really love on the side? Yeah. So I think,
and you know what, I saw something on Amazon, and this particular product had over 2,500 4.5-star reviews, and it was a product called a mouse jiggler. It simulates activity as if you're working on your screen so that you don't get busted by Teams or something. But it's what was really worrying is all the positive reviews that are coming out of it, but the verbatim's coming out. I'm like, oh, it's terrific to read. Ian, I just want to bring you in from that perspective, because that is all around kind of how engaged people are and whether or not they see work as a means to an end, or whether they see it as something that they really truly get behind, and they're aligned to the purpose, they're aligned to the mission of the business. What's your view on that side hustle culture and general work ethic? Is it dying off, work ethic?
No, I don't. But I think again, going back to expectations, I think we as probably older generations, apologies to everyone, you know, we need to understand that younger people coming into our world, contact center, they might not be around for 5, 6 years. The contact center might be their side hustle. And I think we have to be, you know, really sort of positive to that. You know, if you think about what was always the biggest pain in the backside, I've got all these full-time workers all doing 40 hours a week, but I've got this massive piece of inflex I can do nothing with. Let's use part-timers to plug the gap so that they can still crack on with their side hustle. You know, we could flip it around and almost use it to a positive thing. And, you know, let's talk about contact center in terms of it being just a job. Yes, it might be, but if we can, you know, get an extra 6 or 9 months out of someone that we've invested time in, because we're allowing them to do a bit extra outside of work or be creative away from the workplace, then I think it's a good thing. I think there's always going to be a glass ceiling in contact centers, because you've got, you know, a huge population of agents and only a few different roles you can go out and, you know, and expand into. So I think we should have to be realistic about it, but I think the side hustle thing's great. I've not seen a great deal of it myself, personally. I know when I speak to my American colleagues, the gig economy and Uberization of the workforce is a huge thing. But, you know, in the UK, maybe not as much, but I'm all for it.
I think it's probably becoming more prolific in the UK as we speak. I mean, everything, if you look at your Instagram feed, it's how to make a quick buck, doing this, air shipping, airdropping, whatever it's called these days. That's another quick way to make money. And I think maybe I think your approach is right there, actually, is to say, right, how do we flesh that out in the recruitment phase, though, so that we don't hold people to ransom for wanting to have more than one job or for wanting to have more than one interest. What's the advice that you give to recruiting managers to maybe remove that typical approach to recruitment?
So if that's to me,
I'm going to aim that at you, Ian.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I think again, it's about setting expectations. It's about asking the right questions in the interview phase and building some of these, some of these things that's more about the employee rather than saying, are you going to be a good fit for us? It's almost, Mr. Employee, are we going to be a good fit for you? And almost flipping that dynamic on its head when you come to recruit people, because again, going back to job shock and people leaving the first 90 days, if we can coexist with people's work-life balance, not just giving them great shifts and making sure they can drop the kids off at school and do all that kind of stuff, but if we can also coexist with something that they're really passionate about, they're going to bring that passion potentially into the workplace. And for me, it's a win-win. I saw a talk at the forum event, and it was Zoff from LNG. And what they do with their operation support team now is that they give them all 2 hours a week to go in work time to go off and do whatever they want. So you've got people going off, learn how to be a programmer, people going off to learn how to do all sorts of weird and wonderful things. But by giving them that empowerment and giving them that freedom, they're seeing that they're getting a lot more back.
And you know what? I think people that are doing that kind of side hustle and using the contact center to fuel their bigger ambitions in life, I think we have to embrace that entrepreneurial flair of those people as well and say, how can we use that in the contact center to get them to do different things and bring that way of thinking into the contact center world? Keith, I just want to come back to you on the point you were talking about earlier around how we start to operationalize the onboarding experience and how we need to kind of maybe change our approach to how shrinkage is driven these days, given the new environment that we're in. I want you to kind of share your tips on what contact center leaders need to think about and change their mindsets around shrinkage and onboarding when they're bringing in new people.
Okay, there's two distinct parts to that, isn't there? So I'm going to start with shrinkage. Shrinkage is something that people who are doing capacity style resource planning should be all too aware of, but often or not just see it as a set of percentages based on some flat ideals across the year with minimal engagement to the actual operation as to whether they are suitable or not. And when I say the operation, I do mean the frontline operation. There's very minimal contact, or you are at risk if you have minimal contact, say even with the training team. So what are their aspirations for the year? What does their plan look like? When are they going to have key mandatory or non-mandatory training sessions? There's isolation, silos. We've heard all these words many, many times, and they are all a risk of having contradictions to each other. I think also the planning side of things has a historical failing of once we've done it, that's our part done. There's no help to manage the organization and the operation throughout the year to say, well, have you actually achieved what you wanted to do? If you haven't, why isn't it? And that brings you onto the operational decisions, where we've already said what gets pulled first when the going gets tough. It gets pulled, it gets cancelled, it doesn't get rearranged, does it? The scheduling team are too busy to put it in elsewhere. Well, who even owns it? Do you know what I mean? Is it in the schedules, or is it just a shrinkage? All these things just keep getting floated around, and at the end of the day, people miss out. And this time, and I'm just watching the chat as well, we all know how important this time is. But I bet most of us have performed it in a tick box exercise as well. So job done, have done my bit, mate. It's up to you now. And that really, really is not helping the situation. And as for onboarding, I'll just say one word, Gary, and everybody: honesty. You mustn't onboard people if you're not absolutely honest with them. Otherwise, it's just going to come back and bite you at some point. You're going to get flexible working requests, whereas rather than working with people, there's a potential to work against each other. Flexible working is a good thing, but actually the word flexible means different things to two different people, to two parties, depending on which side of the seesaw they're sitting. So, that's quite difficult as well. I've heard some very good interviews over the phone, remote interviews way before COVID to onboard people. I've heard some appalling ones. It's not an HR responsibility. it's a joint responsibility. If HR are undertaking it, have we made sure we've said to them what they want? Have we set the expectations? These are the shifts you'll be doing, or these are the shifts you'll have an options of. It's no point, as one person said to me when I was doing a shift review once, I joined this organisation and I play in a band, but I have to work on a Friday and a Saturday evening. So that's not really good for my band, is it? I think, well, that was, did you even say it? So actually, it's not always the onboarder's responsibility. It's, do you question people enough to actually find out what are your hobbies, what are your interests, what do you like to do when you're not working for us?
And it's that personalization of the approach, isn't it? And
absolutely.
I worked with a guy once, and he says you have to build meaningful connections with people in order for them to help you build trust and loyalty in your workforce. So, and
don't let recruitment become just simply let's get the numbers in. And how many times have we heard that one as well? Because they'll just walk straight out. And we are talking an awful lot about high attrition. And yes, we do realise, as Ian and has already said, that often or not the call centre is a stepping stone. It could be the side hustle, could be a stepping stone into an organisation. Could just be because somebody needs to earn some money as the second earner within a family unit. You know, there's lots of different reasons. It could just be because they offer home working as well. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of different reasons why a call centre can become attractive to somebody. But once they get there, you've got to make sure that it remains attractive. Otherwise, you are churning an awful lot, a huge amount of expensive time, effort, yet alone money.
And do you think?
Go on, Jimmy.
Sorry, I'd just be interested in Ian and Keith's view, though. I like, obviously, because I come at it from like a data and analytics point of view, but like we've been looking at some of our clients, and I look at the amount of reports and like dashboards and data and information that we flood team managers with today. And I almost think that we've got too much data. There's too much data, and there's too many forms, and there's too much going around. Whereas actually, maybe we have lost the art of like building connections and building trust and building loyalty and like those motivational elements. And it's all very like data and KPI driven. But I don't know what your guys' thoughts are.
I think Dan agree with you. Good point there, and I think you'll echo that one, Keith. It's too much data, not enough insight.
Yeah, just put simply, if you look at a cockpit of an old airliner from 1960, dials. Two pilots, two people watching the dials and stuff like that. You know what? It's all screens now, but the biggest relationship that makes the biggest difference to the plane safety and successful flight is between the pilot and the co-pilot. Yeah. And that's what you're saying, isn't it? If you want to take it out of a work thing. So yeah, I totally agree with you, Jimmy. You know, too much data. People are so focused on collecting data. I do also think it's a fantastic loop for people to avoid taking action. We need more data. We need more data. Hang on a minute. You don't need more data. You need help interpreting that data to actually take it into action and have the confidence to do so.
And I think that's a really interesting point. I've got a question for Jimmy around that, is what do team leaders need to do differently to turn that around? And you talked about the Hawthorne effect of that. And when people are observed, they might behave differently. So how do team leaders need to adapt their way of working in order to support that and make sure that that Hawthorne effect doesn't necessarily manifest itself? Or can it, can it not?
Yeah, I think from our point of view, I come at it slightly from a way of, first of all, there needs to be less metrics and there needs to be more meaningful conversations. So we've been looking at like how you manage remote teams within contact centers, and first of all, like simplifying the amount of KPIs. Like sometimes when you're in an office, you felt quite disengaged, and you know it's hard to quite quit when the abandonment rate's 20% and you're getting absolutely bombarded. But then bombarding them with like numerous KPIs and then actually taking them an even further step away, now they're doing it within their own home, it can be like kind of an alienated effect. So some of the things that we've been doing is it's been around data, all these buzzwords, but it's data centralization, but then like fewer better metrics, so and more rounded metrics. So we only need one performance metric, we only need one risk metric, and really we need an engagement metric, like what is the agent sentiment on the call. Like, what is the agent tempo? Are they talking slow? Do they seem tired? And what are those in terms of lead indicators to things like potential absence, potential sickness, potential attrition? So utilizing fewer better metrics to monitor the conversations that are going on within the contact center, and then presenting those to kind of team managers and ops managers as lead indicators to potential shrinkage. And even I hate using the term shrinkage and attrition anyway, like, because it's human beings really, but like, how do we use the data to have better conversations, not just about performance, but also save conversations? And final bit on that as well, I do think that the art of building a team and building kind of rapport and relationships within a team has been lost in and amongst all of the data. And I'm probably one of the people that's caused it in some of these places. But it's like, how do you use data centralization and technology to simplify things for a team leader or a people manager or a coach, so that then the training that they can have is around delivering that information in the most effective manner?
Yeah.
Sorry, Gary, I think, Jimmy, if you've got any nuggets to share, at any point, even after this, how can you actually persuade people that's the way to go? Because I think that's the key, isn't it? Start the ball rolling in a different direction, and stop the momentum in the way it's traditionally gone.
That leads to a question that I had for you, Ian, around the role of the team leader in motivating staff and changing how they motivate people. And we've seen it done with donuts and games on the tables and all those kind of things. But what's the new way of motivating and engaging, or how do team leaders in a new environment motivate and engage in the right way?
Yeah, so if we're motivating and trying to improve the engagement around, say, for example, performance, I think a word that comes up a lot more now is ownership. Performance management is a hideous term anyway, in my view, but it was always owned by the business. They own performance, and the manager then sat down, had this tick the box exercise with the agent. So the manager wasn't engaged with it, and neither was the agent. So what we like to do in Centrical, when we talk to our customers, is empower the manager and the agent to have that path to success together. It's all about collaboration. It's all about visibility, but it's all about putting things right in the time of need as well. So, rather than having a team doing a load of call recordings, running loads of, reports and all that kind of stuff, try and get the data in the time of need with, automated insights is what we like to call it. So that everyone has a view as to how people are performing. But I think on the side of that as well is always give the frontline guys who are being performance managed the why are we doing this. So let's focus more on behaviors rather than numbers. Also, I'm 67%, my target's 80%. What does that mean? Let's focus on the behaviors that underpin getting to great. And I think one thing is that comes up more and more now is one size doesn't fit all for any process in contact center. And what is excellent for one person might be completely different from the other. So I might be the best performer, that's excellent. But if we're onboarding new skills, or I've just been brought across from another department or out of grad bay, me going from 50% to 55% week on week, that could be deemed as excellent. I think it needs to be realistic to the situation.
And as well, Ian, yeah, I think you're totally right. And it's, if you take like typical contact center numbers, so like AHT, conversion, productivity, things like that, like, in what way is that shit transferable for a person like being managed to those sets of metrics? Like, how does that improve my life and my career and stuff? Whereas actually, the tempo, so the tempo of how you're talking, that improves your communication skills, rapport, being able to build rapport in a contact center. Sorry, I've just had this thought, but a contact center agent has more opportunities to work on these core skills every single day than anybody else, because they can practice this 30, 40 plus times a day, depending on your HT, of course, and they've got time to practice it. So, learning to identify empathy and demonstrate empathy, building rapport, building trust, working on your tempo, being able to do that and practice that for a year, you're getting, you know, 1,000 hours of practice being able to communicate in any kind of job. And actually, Stephen Bartlett from from Social Chain, who's on Dragon's Den now, he worked in a contact center, and he said that's how he got a lot of his communication skills. And so we all, like, obviously Keith's there, so we all have to hit our handling time and conversions and our core metrics from a planning perspective. But I think adding metrics which actually help an employee, like, improve the communication skills, I think that's another way in which you can give them a reason to stick around and be engaged.
Yeah, and I think that's about building those career pathways and making sure that people see the work that you're asking them to do and the skills that you're deploying enables them and equips them to do different things, different roles, internally or externally. I just want to come to some of the comments in the chat, and then I want to round off with your top 3 tips to drive employee engagement. So Neve, I hope I've said your name right, Neve, has said in the chat, is employee engagement is surely fundamentally about trust and respect. Ian, I'm going to come to you and ask for your thoughts on that. What do you think?
Yeah, so again, I think I've been having this chat with my team internally now for a few weeks, and obviously I've seen it mentioned in the chat. I think employee engagement, it's too multifaceted to put it down to one thing, if I'm honest. I think it's an output of a number of different things. And 2 main headers that I think it is, it's about having the right expectations set with the employee and giving them the right experience. I think by proxy, you then get a good or a bad engagement, which obviously has loads of knock-on effects in terms of, you know, great things for the business. But, you know, when I kind of shudder when I see we have an employee engagement solution. You know, there isn't a one-size-fits-all from a tech perspective or from an approach perspective. But I think there's building blocks before we get to employee engagement being good or bad. I think there's so much we can do before then. And again, that starts on day one when someone joins a business, is to make sure that, you know, that's in place. And it is a tough one to write down on a single bit of paper, but, you know, working on those things from day one, I think you do end up with better employee engagement overall.
Brilliant. And Jimmy, I want to come to you for this one, which is a comment from Emily Shaw in the chat saying, a buddy or a go-to person is a great way to keep the employees wanting to embrace the culture. Developing a psychological contract. I like that term, a psychological contract. What's your thoughts on Emily's comment there?
I think like she's stealing our product roadmap. So yeah, so I'll give you guys an insight into that. I completely agree. So one thing that we do is we take elements of our kind of conversational guidance, kind of next best action tool. We've got speech analytics where we identify if we're causing confusion or this negative agent or customer sentiment, or if the agent's talking in an empathetic manner, things like that. And then we push it all into coaching, and the coaching is it's quintile analysis. Like, are you on a scale of 1 to 5, how good at you at all of those metrics? But I felt as though we've been missing something, because even though we do allow a manager to give kudos to people, a lot of the time it's about scheduling coaching, because we need to, like, have a performance conversation. But actually, like, well, I started to have this thought probably about 2 weeks ago. We need to connect it. We need to connect it together, and we need to make it more around buddying. So if we added certain elements to our platform, why couldn't we showcase people as being role models? So who within your business are role models for building rapport, or role models for identifying vulnerability, or role models for engagement? And then how can we give a sample of those calls as self-learning? Because I saw something in here as well about self-learning and motivation. How can we empower every agent to be able to go and have a look at a role model and go, how can I build rapport better, and how can I have better conversations? And so a lot of the work we'll be doing over the next 12 months is around not just going, you're not so great at that, but actually these people are great. these are a sample of contacts that are absolutely fantastic. Go and listen to them as part of your to empower you to take your own decisions, and then monitor that progress, because I'm sure, in fact, I'm 99.9% positive that that's going to have like dramatic effects within our client base.
And I think we've talked to Chris Jones's point a little bit, but I'm just going to direct it to Keith a little bit, saying, does the panel think we have lost the capacity to engage deeply with anything? Not just the work environment, but humans are constantly distracted and trying to multitask while our devices constantly distract us. We have such a short attention span. Have we replaced sense of purpose and engagement with a desire for volume and variety? And I'm thinking specifically from some of the tasks and activities that we ask call center agents to do there, Keith. What's your view on Chris's point in the chat there?
I think we have, and I think there are some generational differences that Ian's already pointed out, which will mean some people are much more adept and will favour certain methods of communication that others would find an overload is completely repulsive to them. Others will say, don't you dare use anything. But I do think, as a society generally, we are in information overload, and within that information, we allow others to set what we think is acceptable and what isn't. And I'm not sure that we always filter out those who overstate life and situations and in other words, present a perfect case, which we're never going to be able to match up to. And equally, I set my expectations. Some days at work are going to be great. Some days are going to be crap. That's how life has taught me. And work is no exception to that. And I don't quit because I've had a bad day. I'd quit if I was having a bad year, potentially, and that's a different thing. So yeah, I think there is so much information out there. I think I would just summarize it a bit like what Jimmy was saying about the data. Just pumping people full of data is not going to get better results. In fact, it's probably going to drive worse results. There are instances as well where you can automate. So speech analytics really is a huge coaching tool, because a lot of coaches spend most of their time listening to calls rather than actually talking to agents about their calls. So where you can actually do that. Why are you only monitoring 4 or 8 out of a month's worth of customer interactions when you should be looking to have some sort of monitor for all of them? So you're not looking for the worst ones. It's always been a standard. Oh, you unluckily picked the worst ones. Right, okay, I can't argue that as a coach, can I? Unless you're saying it to me every month, in which case I might say something. So I do think there's information overload. I think adversely, I think we should probably need to concentrate on what information we need more of to help us and how we achieve that without that becoming another level of expertise for a person to do.
I'd agree. We've got 4 minutes remaining, so what I want to do is just go through my my panel and ask for your top 3 tips for operational leaders or people in the contact center to help drive a more engaged workforce and a workforce that is less focused on quiet quitting, perhaps, if that's going through their mind. So I'm going to come to Jimmy first and say, what would your top 3 tips for our listeners to be?
So I think the first one for me is, I've changed my mind as we've gone through this, but I think my first one is establishing what are those engagement KPIs that you want to track, and then creating like what that means, and then find who are your role models within your business who like really drive those engagement KPIs. I think secondly, you've got to sort out your operating model. And what is are you hybrid? Are you in office? Are you remote? I see a lot of people just dilly-dallying around this type of stuff, and you really got to make a call, because that informs like the types of people that you'll employ in the future and how you'd want to engage with them and keep them around the business or the transient workers. And then finally, something that we're really keen on is like, what is your engagement operating model? So what is the daily, it's on the intraday, daily, weekly, monthly cadence that you're going through to drive engagement, and replacing kind of your old hardcore metrics like AHT with your new metrics, but also an engagement strategy to make sure that shit gets done like on a regular basis.
Ian, I'm going to come to you next. Top 3 tips.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I think the main one for me is personalize as much of the colleague and manager experience as possible. Obviously, everyone's different. We still have a lot of one-size-fits-all processes in contact centers. So how do we personalize that? And obviously, we've got some ideas on that. See engagement as a byproduct of other things. So, you know, employee expectations, employee experience, and work on those things as day one. So almost as sort of, you know, speed to competence, almost have these things built into a life cycle of an agent, or even a manager when we onboard those guys, and ownership. So, you know, empower colleagues and managers to own that path to success or where they want to go next. Collaboration and visibility being the key things for that. So those would be my 3 things.
Brilliant. And Keith, if you could summarize your 3 in 60 seconds, what would they be?
Right, okay, very simply here, from a planning point of view, don't just make the numbers compelling. Don't make the maths be the basis of this. You need to understand the reality of it. You need to understand whether those numbers can be delivered, avoiding that quiet quitting, making sure people are rewarded. We're not using discretionary effort as a baseline, that type of thing. Adversely, when people are promising you more productivity, don't just accept it. If people are saying, yes, we can reduce AHT, we can change these metrics, you need to know what they're doing to do that. Because otherwise, you've fallen into the first trap, haven't you? You've changed the numbers so it all looks good, but you know that's not going to be delivered. And then there is a third one, which the use of historic data alone. Okay, we mine data, we look for things, we use historic data. Workforce management tools are fantastic tools in telephony. Do you know what? How often do we really understand the circumstances around how those numbers were generated? It's often held in people's heads, they move on, or it's never ever recorded. The tools still don't have very good means to even just put tags on them. So it can very often go spectacularly wrong because you've got outliers in there. That's the absolute minimum, take your outliers out, those sorts of things. But we need to be doing better at that as well from a resource planning point of view. If we're not, we are creating a gap between us and those that we're working for, and I use that term very carefully, and therefore our engagement is pretty poor. Do you know what I mean? We're just going to get pushed back. We're going to be, as Ian said earlier, the people who say no.
Brilliant. And I think there's 3 words that sum up everything that we've talked about here. I think it's the communication that happens across the organization, it's the connection that you make with those people around you, and it's how effectively we prepare leaders to coach and have meaningful conversations, which is I think summarizes some of the key points that we've got from this. All that's left to say from me is thank you to Jimmy, Ian and Keith. Thank you to everybody that turned up. I think that's been a really awesome discussion. All the stuff in the chat is really interesting to read. I will be recording this and I will send it out to everybody. So if you know of anybody that wanted to join that couldn't, please feel free to share it with them. And if you want to put anything awesome on social media about this event in particular, please feel free to do so. It'd be awesome. The more people that we can get to these events and sharing all this great stuff, the better. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I'll just keep Jimmy, Ian and Keith for 2 seconds while we go, and I'll say goodbye to everybody else.
Cheers, guys.